When I was 9 years old, my father gave me a doll. The doll was beautiful and large, about half my height. She had golden curly hair and blue eyes. She was dressed in a lovely white dress. When my father brought me the doll, he said it had belonged to my grandmother, who had passed away a long time ago. The doll had been lying in a suitcase in the attic for several years until my father found it and brought it to me. I was overjoyed by the gift at that age. I loved playing with dolls. On the first night, I placed the doll next to me on the bed. I had a bad dream, woke up, and noticed that the doll's head was turned towards me, and its eyes were staring at me. I turned the doll's head back to its normal position and tried to fall asleep again. After a while, when I opened my eyes, I was surprised to see that the doll's head was turned again, and its eyes were fixed on me. I thought to myself, maybe it's a childish thought, but at the time it seemed entirely possible. I asked it, "Why are you looking at me?" Of course it didn't respond. After a few minutes, I fell asleep. The next day, when I woke up, I went to the bathroom to wash up and discovered a small bruise on my left wrist. The bruise looked like the imprint of a tiny hand. I immediately thought of the doll and remembered how it had been looking at me during the night. After washing up, I returned to my room and approached the bed where the doll lay. Its head was now in a normal position, with its eyes staring at the ceiling. Just then, my father walked in and told me to get dressed quickly because we had to go to the hospital to see the dentist. After returning from the dentist, I spent the entire day with my neighbor, who was my best friend. In the evening before bed, I took the doll off the bed and placed it in the corner with my other two dolls. I had another creepy dream that night, and the new doll was in it. When I woke up, I saw the doll lying next to me on the bed, its head turned and eyes staring at me. I screamed out of shock. A few seconds later, my father came into the room and turned on the light. "What happened?" he asked. I told him that the doll, which I had left in the corner, had ended up in my bed, and it had scared me. My father smiled, walked over, and kissed me on the forehead. "Sleep tight," he said. "I'll take the doll to the living room." I nodded and wiped the tears from my eyes. My father left, but I couldn't fall asleep. I tossed and turned in bed for an hour, but eventually managed to doze off. Morning came. I got up, washed, and went to the kitchen, but my father wasn't there. Strange, I thought. He always greeted me in the kitchen in the mornings and prepared breakfast. I went to his room and opened the door. My father was lying on the floor next to the bed, completely pale. It felt like I was struck by lightning when I saw that he was lying there, not breathing. I ran to him, shouting, "Dad, Dad." But my father didn't respond. Through my tears, I saw that the doll was sitting opposite his bed, staring at me. It seemed like she was smiling, or maybe she really was. Not knowing what I was doing, I grabbed her by the hair, opened the window, and threw her outside. Then I ran to the living room, picked up the phone, and called an ambulance. They arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. My father was already dead. The doctors asked me about my relatives and called the local police officer. Later, when the relatives arrived and I had calmed down a bit, I suddenly thought, what if someone finds the doll and the same thing happens to them that happened to me? I ran outside and went to the spot under the window where I had thrown her, but the doll was nowhere to be found. Many years have passed since then. I've grown up, but I can't forget that doll. Sometimes I dream about her. When I do, I wake up screaming and can't fall asleep again for a long time. Mitchell knew that his grandfather's old house creaked and sighed at night because the house was settling. The ground can't bear the weight of the house, so it sinks, and that's why the beams creak, his father explained when Mitchell, frightened by the nighttime rustlings and noises, ran to him with wide, scared eyes. Once the midnight terror was explained with simple, dry facts, Mitchell stopped being afraid. There was nothing scary about the fact that the house was a bit too heavy for the ground. Sure, he could have been scared that the house might sink lower and lower until it fell into a terrifying underground pit where it would keep falling for eternity, but that couldn't happen either. Mitchell knew this for sure because he had read the encyclopedia for preschoolers, where the structure of the earth was well explained. It was like an onion, many layers, with a core in the middle. Grandpa died 2 years later, and the house was sold. A new one was bought, closer to the city, so it would be more convenient for his parents to get there on weekends. Mitchell immediately claimed a room on the top floor. He particularly liked the antique bed, wide and long like a runway. He placed his books and a plastic transformer robot on the shelf above. On the very first night, the house started to sigh and groan right above his head. 2 steps across the ceiling, then something seemed to bump into the wall outside the house. "It's just the house settling," Mitchell said aloud, and standing on the bed, he grabbed one of his books and a flashlight. His parents had forbidden him from reading under the covers, but what they would never find out was allowed. And making something like a tent supported by his knees, the boy aimed the beam of light at the page and immersed himself in reading. Boom. Bang. The noises were so loud it felt like someone was walking right through the small room, trying to find where Mitchell was hiding. Maybe in the closet, and a creak could be heard. No, he wasn't there. Then he must be trembling with fear under the bed. And a short, dry rustling could be heard across the carpet. Well, if he's not there, then Mitchell must be behind the toy box. And the cardboard box filled with toy cars and soldiers creaked across the floor. Mitchell blinked and stared at the page, realizing he had read the same sentence 2 or 3 times without understanding it. The creaking of this strange old house was too loud, but his dad couldn't be lying. He said it was just the sounds of the beams hidden in the walls, so it must be true. And Mitchell, throwing off the blanket and breathing in the cool night air, stared into the darkness. Gradually, his eyes, blinded by the light reflected from the white page, began to adjust. The room looked as usual. The closet was closed. The toy box sat in the corner, a dark, shapeless pile. Everything was probably the same under the bed, too. "I'm not afraid of you," Mitchell said loudly, but not so loud as to wake his parents. He climbed down from the bed, leaving the warm blanket and cozy bed to cool in solitude. He would go to the kitchen and get some water, proving that no night monsters could scare him. Pulling up his blue pajama pants as he walked, he disappeared into the darkness beyond the doorway. But soon he returned, wiping water from his lips. The room remained unchanged. Satisfied with his victory, Mitchell climbed back under the blanket, once again creating a tent, and turned on the flashlight. The house above him quietly sighed and went silent. Mitchell managed to read an entire chapter before his leg began to itch. He scratched it, but the itch didn't stop. It felt like some insect was tickling his skin with its legs. Tired of scratching, he lowered the book to shine the flashlight on the itching area. The light revealed a bloated, pale face with a pair of shiny black eyes, gleaming like olives, emerging from the shadows under the blanket. How wonderful, how good, it had finally found Mitchell.